We are in Genesis chapter 28, beginning in verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth and its top reaching to heaven. The angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father, Abraham, the God of Isaac, and I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early in that next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, I will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household. Then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. And let's pray. Father, we bow before you this morning. We pause and thank you for Memorial Day, for this place, for this time that we can come together. And I'm thankful that folks could have been so many different places today, but yet they chose to be here. So Father, I pray this morning that you will bless this message, that Father, you will not only inform us, but may we be transformed for having been in this place and being exposed to your word. And so we'll thank you for it in Christ's name. Amen. I shared with a lot of you a few weeks ago how Pam and I had the opportunity when we were in San Diego to drive to Simi Valley and went to Reagan's Presidential Library. It was of course, when you go through there, you're watching the whole thing and you're thinking, for those of you that were alive during that time, we're looking at today, we are remembering back at a time when the adults ran the country, because everybody got along a little bit better and could get stuff done. But it was interesting because as I was watching this, they actually had a piece of the Berlin Wall out there, an actual piece of the Berlin Wall, because you remember it was Reagan that said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And those of you that remember that, it was a powerful, powerful time. So here is the Berlin Wall. Now, right just a little beyond that is President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan's gravesite. It's not that far away. So we're watching, we see people from all of these different nations that are there that are taking pictures. But then there were the ones that were rather disturbing to me. Because there were people that were going up and hanging off the wall and getting pictures taken. And they were taking selfies and making weird faces. And I thought to myself, man, that's just, to me, it was disrespectful. We walked over to the gravesite and I'm standing there and it's we're being very, very quiet. All these people are like, they're talking away. And I'm thinking to myself, this is really a place where we should probably be quiet. It reminded me a little bit of, I felt like a librarian, we used to go to libraries, because I was always the one, the librarian was going, shh. I know that surprises most of you, but it just seemed disrespectful to me. And I thought, these monuments, that library, the Berlin Wall, the grave sites are to me a hallowed thing because they remind us of where we've come from. They remind us of the struggles that we have overcome. Some of them remind us of what we never want to be again. And that's why when people talk about destroying monuments because of certain things, I don't want to destroy any of them. Because just because they're a monument doesn't mean it was a good time. It could have been a horrific time where we go, we never want to be there again. We never want to be in that place again. Memorials are so important. And on this Memorial Day, often I know people are going to be going out. It's a day off, and they're going to be doing yard work, and people are going to be, going off and having barbecues and all of those kinds of things. But Memorial Day didn't really become an official day until 1971. But it goes way back to during the Civil War. Officially, it was 1971 when it became an official national holiday. Years ago, when it first started, it was called Decoration Day because they would go out and would decorate the graves of the Civil War soldiers. Today, you will see often different decorations happening in the same way. But we're supposed to stop and remember those today when we look at Memorial Day who gave their lives for this country. I understand that we are a country of people that have come from all over the place, but that's part of our history. There are people that gave our lives so that we could be doing this today. And I will say this to you, and this is not to be offensive to anybody from any other country, but we still are the freest country around. Regardless of all the nonsense that's going on in Washington, D.C., there's not a better time that I would rather live, a better time to be alive, and a better time for us to be free. And I think that we have to remember that. So memorials are important. We can never, ever, ever forget them. Now, of course, they will come and markers. We'll go to grave sites and we'll see, if you've been to Arlington, the Tomb of the Unknown, you see those kinds of things. But there are also marker points in our lives that we remember that we came to that point and we look at that marker and we say, that meant that we were never going to be the same. Maybe it was a relationship that was dissolved or a relationship that you got in. Maybe it was a business or a job or it was something like that. But it was a marking point when you went, okay, this is where this happened and things were never the same. When we lose sight of those markers in our lives, those memorial points, we can also lose our way. It's very interesting because the first memorial marker that was really mentioned pretty much in the Bible that we think back to was this particular passage in Genesis chapter 28. Now, let me give you a little bit of background as to what is happening here, because if you know the story of Jacob, and if you don't, let me just kind of bring you up to speed a little bit as to what has happened. Isaac was Jacob's father. Jacob had a brother by the name of Esau. Jacob and Esau were somewhat twins, of course. Esau was the guy who was supposed to have the birthright. He was the firstborn. He was going to be the guy that was going to carry on the family name. And of course, if you remember the story, Jacob went in and he tricked his father into getting the birthright. Ultimately, it was God's ultimate plan for Jacob to be the guy, but the way it all happened, often it's amazing how things happen. They don't happen in God's plan, but he works them out for good. But see, now there's a problem because that birthright was important. It was a big deal. And so suddenly Jacob's mom comes to him and says, listen, your brother is going to kill you. It's going to be over. And so Jacob gets the blessing from his dad. His dad tells him, I want you to go and make sure that here's where you need to take a wife from, not like your brother Esau. So go, get out of here. He leaves in that sense with Jacob's blessing. But he's also heading to be obedient to what his father told him to do. But he's also trying to get out of there because Esau is going to kill him. And he knows that as soon as his dad is dead, Esau is going to avenge him. That's it. So he's running towards obedience and he's running away from his brother. You ever have that happen? It's like this tension where you're doing the right thing, but you're scared to death of something, and you're trying to get away from it. That's where Jacob finds himself. So he's on the way. He's going where he's supposed to go. He's doing his thing. And often we're looking to make big changes in our lives. You know how you look to make big changes, and you think. Have you ever noticed that the biggest changes of your life happened where you were just doing your thing and all of a sudden something showed up, something changed, and it totally turned everything around for you? But you were just doing your thing. You weren't necessarily looking for it at that moment. That's exactly what happens to Jacob. I want to take you here and look at this story. So he leaves Beersheba, verse 10, and he sets out for Haran. He reaches a certain place. He stops for the night because the sun has set. So he takes a stone. Sounds uncomfortable, doesn't it? The stone's going to be like his pillow. That's some rough camping. I mean, I used to camp in the Everglades when we still had, softer things. So he's going to use this stone. He puts it under his head and he goes to sleep. All right. Jacob's going to sleep. He's probably exhausted because he's running to obey, but he's probably thinks I'm just a few steps ahead of my brother, so I'm going to keep going. So all of a sudden, he has a dream in which he sees a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Now, can you imagine this? Now, here's the guy, and this was a dream that, I had one of these the other night, not like that. I had a weird dream the other night where it was one of those things where it is so real, you wake up and you're glad that it wasn't. You ever have one of those where you go, oh, man. Mine are usually I'm treading water or swimming water somewhere. I don't know what that has to do. Somebody's probably going to interpret it for me and tell me I think I'm drowning or something. But I have these dreams that sometimes seem real. And so Jacob is seeing this thing, but we find out later this is a vision of God in the dream. But he sees this as he's laying there, this incredible stairway. And he sees angels coming and going. And the stairway is connecting heaven and it's connecting earth. And it had to have been both a beautiful and a frightening thing. And he says, I saw the angels of God were ascending and descending, and there above it stood the Lord. Okay, hang on a second. So now he's seeing God. Now, this happens some in the Old Testament, but not a lot. I mean, there's different appearances. He's seeing this, and he says, and notice what happens. The Lord said, I am the Lord. And notice what he says. I am the God. So he says, I'm the Lord, I'm the God, two different Hebrew words, of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. Now notice what he says there. Did you get that? Abraham was his grandfather. But he says, I am the God of your father Abraham and Isaac. Your fathers, Abraham and Isaac. Now it's very interesting because there is, way back at around Genesis 12, we see something that's called the Abrahamic covenant. God tells Abraham one day, he says, Abraham, I want you to look up to the stars. And he says, I want you to look, can you count the stars? Abraham's not like, I can't count the stars. He says, then you can't count them. That's what your descendants are going to number. There will be so many, you will not be able to figure out how many, you won't be able to count them. You won't be able to know all of their names. I remember years ago, I had a family, their mother died, and there was 12 children, and there was 55 grandchildren. I said to the oldest son, I said, do you want me to mention the grandchildren by name? And he goes, well, can you? I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. If you can list all the grandchildren, first name only, oldest to youngest, I'll read all of their names. And several of them looked at one another and said, yeah, never mind, forget it. 55 was too many, to start remembering. No, there's so-and-so, trying to get the right order. So he tells Abraham, listen, it's going to be innumerable. You're not going to be able to count it. And so now here is God in this dream. He says to Jacob, he says, your father Abraham and your father Isaac, I'm their God. And he looks at Jacob and he says this, I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. So now God is confirming the covenant from Abraham to Isaac and now to Jacob in this dream. And he says, your descendants will be, now he told Abraham it was going to be like the dust, or like the stars. Look at what he tells Jacob. He goes, your descendants are going to be like the dust on the earth. And you will spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. Get this, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I'm going to stop there for a second. Because God told Abram, he said, Abram, in you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. It's pretty interesting that God tells Abraham, modern day Israel, technically the Jewish people have come from Abraham. Isn't it amazing? Have you ever stopped and looked at how a small, tiny nation that is surrounded by enemies survives? I still believe today there is this thing that God said, I'm going to bless them that bless you, and I'm going to curse them that curse you. And in you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. He literally told him this. Now, some people may be thinking, well, that's not fair. Why did God choose the Jewish people? I'm going to give you the best theological answer that you have ever gotten anywhere. Are you ready? Here it is. You can write this down. Because he wanted to. That's it. That's why when we talk about salvation by grace, it's God's choice to give us grace. It's because he wants to. I have no idea. Did they do anything? No. Did they turn their back on him? Yes. Read the Old Testament over and over and over again. Do we turn our back on him? Yes. Over and over and over again. Does he still love us? Yes. So he says, listen, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. And then he says this, verse 15, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. Not leaving. I'm going to be with you, Jacob. Everything is going to work out. I know things seem bleak. I know right now that you're heading to get a wife and obey your father. I know that you're running from your brother, but I'm telling you that the land that you are on, that you're going to carry this thing through. Your descendants are going to be like the dust of the earth. I'm never going to leave you. This is going to be your land. You can count on it. And suddenly he wakes up. Wakes up from the dream. And then he says this. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Ooh. How many? You ever have that happen? You ever been doing your thing? You ever been going on your way? You ever been running for something, running from something? You ever been running towards something and you think you're just so preoccupied with everything else, and then something happens and God shows up in some weird way, a miracle happens, and all of a sudden we go, man, God was right here all the time. That's exactly what Jacob wakes up and goes, God's here. And I almost missed it. Sometimes we expect God to show up in these fanciful ways. He does here in a dream, but the point that God was trying to make to Jacob is he says, listen, I have to tell you something. I've always been here, and I will always be here because you are mine. Right here. And so he says, it happened, and I didn't even realize he was here. And Jacob is now suddenly, as they're saying in the modern vernacular, he's woke. And then, I don't know whether it happened to you, but then it's like, ooh. You ever realize that God showed up and all of a sudden you're thinking, all right, wait a minute. Then you get a little scared. That's exactly what happens to him. He's like, hey, oh man, this is great. God's here. And then he went, oh man. He was afraid and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. The gate of heaven. The house of God. Hebrew, Bethel. I have a friend that's a pastor of Bethel Baptist Church, which is House of God Baptist Church. Bethel. Now, it's interesting because he's outside. He gets in, he's sitting there, he wakes up and he goes, surely this is the house of God. This is the gateway to heaven. Why he's saying that is, no, you don't have to go to that particular mountain. There's not some kind of a vortex that'll suck you up in there and you get to see the presence of God. What he's saying is, God was right here with me all along. This is the house of God. This is Bethel. And so notice what he does. What he realizes is this is a changing point for him. He had stole the birthright. He had gone the wrong direction. He had tricked his father. He got the blessing. His brother's after him. He doesn't know what's going to happen next. He's just trying to now go and obey his father. And he realizes this is the moment that he needs to, that everything has changed for him. Because God has showed up and said, I got you. So what does he do? Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and he set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. And he called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. So just imagine what he did here. He takes this stone and he sets it up on its head. And he pours oil on top of it. It probably wasn't a big stone, but he pours oil on top of it to consecrate it. He anoints it, and he says, this place, because the land was his, I'm now calling this place Bethel, the house of God. Now, why did they do the memorial markers? For the same reason, one of my favorite stories in Joshua 4, when they had to take the stones, and they took the stones and they put them up on the, God said, take one from each, have each tribe take one from the Jordan River. So they were there so that years from now, what happened when somebody came upon that stone, because remember, his descendants were going to be so numerous, he wouldn't be able to count them. They were going to come to this place, and oral tradition, it was always passed down through oral tradition. Hey, what is this stone about? Oh, let me tell you about this stone. Let me tell you, your great-great-great-grandfather Jacob, God told him here the following, and you are here because of that. Each memorial contained a story. And it was a story of when God met Jacob and said, I got you. And Jacob made a vow. Now, this is interesting. I just want you to see what he says here. Because now you can tell he's still scared. So isn't it, when you go back to your life, you have one of these defining moments, but then you got to get back to life. And you're still scared, and you're still running, you're still trying to do the right thing, but you still have this moment when you're scared out of your mind. And it says, Jacob makes a vow. He goes, okay, I met God here, but if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and he will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then notice what he says. I love this. He goes, then the Lord will be my God. You read that? Then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. What? Jacob sees God, and he says, okay, now, God, if this is true, and you do all of these things that you say you're going to do, then this is going to be the place, the house of God. This memorial is going to stay here, and I'm going to give you a tenth of everything that I have. That's where we get this idea of tithing from. It starts back then, and, the New Testament doesn't really talk about it as much, but that's what they did in the Old Testament, and Jacob kind of started part of this here. And so he now said, he's now still bargaining with God. If all of this happens, then this is what I'm going to do. But it was still a moment of change. A marker was there, and it was set up, and the place was called Bethel, the house of God. And he says, you know what, God, I'm going to continue to give back when all of this happens. Here's the thing, folks. Memorials are so important. Whether that moment of the memorial is a moment in time where something changed for us, or whether it's an actual marker that we can go to. I can go to the city of Pompano Beach and can go down one particular lane, and there are gravestones, and where my father's there, and my grandparents are there, and my aunts and uncles are there, and I could go through there, and I could take my kids through and take people through and tell them the stories. When I took a friend of mine around Pompano, I was showing him, so and so used to live here, and see that house there. This was so and so. We could go through, but each of them told a story of something that happened in the city. But we have those moments where those moments have changed, and we have these literal markers in our lives, and they are set to do two things. Think about this. Memorials anchor us, and they guide us. So what do you mean by that? They anchor us to the past, to know where we came from. The good, the bad, and the ugly. There are things in our past as a country that are not all good. Of course not. They anchor us back to that, and we go, okay, yeah, that's not where we want to go back to. We don't want to do that again. But we also have to look at the good things and say, are we in line with that, and are we heading in the direction where we're supposed to be going? So those memorials anchor us. They also guide us. They keep us on the path so we can look and say, yep, we're doing the right thing. We need memorial markers in our lives. We need those memorial moments in our lives to keep us going. They bring meaning. They give us a sense of mission. Think about that. Jacob's got a mission now. God said to him, listen, you are going to be the guy. I promised Abraham. I promised your father Abraham. I promised your father Isaac. I'm telling you, your descendants are going to be like dust. I told Abraham it was going to be like the stars. You guys are setting something up. You are my covenant people. You all are on a mission. It also gave Jacob's life meaning. I don't know about you, but listen. When I've messed up, I don't know whether you've ever messed up and you feel like you've messed up so bad that your life loses a sense of meaning and you lose that sense of direction. You're like, I could never go back. You think about stealing a birthright. You think about stealing a birthright while your dad is on his deathbed and you lie to him. How do you come back from that? And yet Jacob, at that very moment, God gave Jacob that sense of meaning and said, no, this is where you're going. I'm still with you. And that's why Jacob was able to look at this. So he had that meaning and that mission. And it's giving him motivation to get up and move on, because the next day he continues on the path. He continues where he's supposed to go. He continues going along the way. Why? Because God met him there. I don't know what you're struggling with today. I don't know what you're going through. Sometimes you may look at the past and go, oh my goodness, you can't believe what's happened. If I sat and told you what happened to me, there's no way that I can get back on track. There's no way that God's going to love me. There's no way that he's going to meet me. There's no way. I'm too far gone. And God says, no, you're not. Because I'm here. I got you. We need these memorial points in our lives to anchor us and to guide us. And God wants to create more of those times in your life if you'll let him. I was talking about the city of Pompano Beach. A few weeks ago, the McNabb House, if any of you that have been around the kind of Florida for a while may know that name up in the Pompano area. There's McNabb Road and McNabb School and all of that. And my aunt married one of the McNabbs, my mom's sister. And so we were all kind of related by marriage, and I grew up with many of them. And so up in the city of Pompano Beach, there were two McNabb houses. If you go up Atlantic Boulevard and you're heading towards Federal Highway, there are these two sort of majestic old houses. One of them has now been turned into a preschool, I believe. But the other one, that literally the descendants of the McNabbs, who are friends of ours, had been given them. They were living in. The house was built in like 1915, something like that, and it sits right there. And I've got pictures of it from when it was first built, black and white pictures, when there was nothing around the city of Pompano Beach. And so what happened was they decided they wanted to give the house to the Historical Society and Pompano, and the Historical Society said, "No, we can't afford it. We can't afford to move it." So they wound up having to sell the land. Well, finally, a group of citizens came in and said, wait a minute, we need to do something with this house. So, of course, everything now, everything's political now, right? And we were talking about that earlier. You think it's bad nationally? Go to your local city. It's really bad. Seriously. If you live in Dania Beach, you ought to go Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. All I'm going to say. It's really bad. So, of course, this became an issue, and so they were actually going to destroy the McNabb house. And there were people that were like, they have a park. There was a park called McNabb Park. Now, I'll tell you why it's called McNabb Park. Because Mr. McNabb, Robert McNabb, gave that park to the city many years ago, right off of Federal Highway. It's prime property now. And so there are people that go there, no offense to y'all that play shuffleboard, but they play shuffleboard there. That's all that's there. Okay, that's nice. But there's all these other parks around. People were upset that they were going to move the house to the park. So, as normally my friend said, there's never a microphone that I've seen that I don't want to get behind. I went to the city commission meeting. And they were talking about the McNabb house. And that's when I thought, I've listened to all the nonsense, and I signed the paper, and I thought, that's it. So I got up and I spoke, because what I'd heard about Mr. McNabb, one of the great-great-granddaughters was sitting right next to me. She goes, did you know did you know what Papa did? She said, he gave so much of the money. She said, do you know that he gave the property to build the first funeral home? He gave it to R.J. Career. He gave him the land. Literally gave. I said, you mean he like deeded it over to him? He said, yes, he gave it to him. He didn't have to pay a dime. And the church and the parsonage and all of the different land he gave for them to be able to build all of that kind of stuff. She had told me that actually beforehand. And I got up and I talked about that. And I said, but more than anything else, the McNabbs were Pompano Beach. And they were generous, generous people. And that's what the city of Pompano Beach was all about. Finally, it wasn't because of me, but because of a lot of people. They decided to move the house and everything went through. And it's going to be a done deal here pretty soon. I'm so glad. Because when I drive by that house, I have fond memories of having been in there as a child. But I also know the McNabbs. And it's the history of a city. It makes us go back to a time when people cared, when they gave and they made a difference. It is, for better or worse, a memorial. We need memorials in our lives. Maybe you've lost an anchor. Maybe you've lost your way. Stop. Take a breath. Take a pause. That's what Jacob did. It was time for him to rest. And in that moment when he rested, God showed up. And he'll show up for you too. Let's pray.